Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Steven.
And I'm Jonathan.
And today we're talking about what is role-playing. So what have you been up to this week, John?
Hey, this week, oh boy. So followers of our podcast, people who have been around listening for a week or so, have known that I am on the
Long-time followers, going back
on the
7 days.
7 days, maybe even 14. Some of them have known that I'm on the land hunt, looking for a place to settle, to actually put down roots. Some good news came this week, and we are very, very close to actually signing a contract, getting that land.
Getting off that grid.
I actually have the inbox of my Gmail in my site to know, oh, you got it, right?
Slightly disturbing.
If I'm a little bit distracted, that's why. This is a very important, really, next 48 hours are very important. So could happen, could not. A lot of just nervousness.
Hopes, dreams.
But you really want
ins and outs, what have
Yeah, that's the problem, is that once we got the good news about it, I let myself realize how much I wanted it. I'd been playing it pretty cool before then. But like everything, this is what I was talking about when I thought that I was about to lose it. Much like every relationship that I have ever been in, I thought that I wanted it, and then it comes to find out there was something way better later on down the road. So I'm trying to keep myself in the mindset of that everything ultimately works out, especially if you let yourself detach from the desire that you can no longer happen.
We should talk about stoicism at some point.
Yeah, stoicism, or even just the idea
21.
of karma. Yeah, stoicism.
Like stoicism in the real sense of the philosophy,
not
just somebody who doesn't feel anything.
Yeah, exactly. That's sort of the high school misunderstanding of stoicism, of which I once was a part. But it's basically the idea of stoicism, just for a quick primer.
Here we go.
Is just that realizing all of the possibilities that could happen, and then not being surprised when one of those does. Simple as that.
And basically parsing what can you control and what can't you control.
Yeah.
And if you can't control it, then it may well happen.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do differently? You can't
Accept
do anything.
experience.
What can you control? What can't you control? Right? It's the Serenity Prayer. This thing crops up every time. Even so, I've been reading this Shogun book. It's exceptionally good, but it talks about the Japanese idea of karma, and basically that idea is that it's when something happens that you can't help. That's karma, right? Or fate, or whatever you want to call it. So sort of combating that, which sort of my natural human, but also I think me personally, or people of my personality types, penchant for excitement and hope and investing a lot of myself into this kind of stuff. So sort of balancing between those two things and trying to walk that middle line. And it's exhausting, but it is ultimately all for the best. And sometimes you have to be exhausted. Sometimes you have to fight through the underworld, so to speak, to get to finish the hero.
There was so much in that paragraph of John.
Yeah, really.
What about you, Steve?
Really brought it there.
I mean, there's a million of your key tenets and philosophies buried into that. We could spend 2 hours parsing that paragraph. But onward.
All right, I'll say this. A couple of things just technically to get out of the way. I wanted to make a mention of any Destiny listeners who have also been buying Saga sets from us. First wave of those were in and out of stock very quickly in succession yesterday. And first of all, that is amazing. So thank you, for all of our Destiny fans that are supporting us in the Saga sets. Also subscriptions. We opened up some slots and those got filled. So that's fantastic. And also wrapping that into, if you want to know that kind of information ahead of time, we're really amping up our email newsletter game. That's a focus of marketing this time around the next couple of months. So we're going to be doing that a lot more with that coming up. And so get on that newsletter. It's in our footer of our current website.
Would you say that's, at this point, the primary way, especially for people who want subscriptions or Saga sets, is to get on that wait list and to get on the newsletter?
Yeah. Just
the wait list is very important.
That's the first place that we're going to stop with information.
Yeah.
It starts with the email, because that's the most... you've given us the most, information about yourself.
Yeah.
You've said, here is literally how you can email me at any moment with news. And that's really important for us to have and very valuable for us to have. So we like to reward that with the most information, right?
Yep.
So it makes sense. Secondarily, this is the last, I guess, consistently video recorded podcast I think that we're going to do.
Get all your movements in, use all the frames you can.
Yeah, so we wanted to, this is episode 20, we wanted to give it a good kind of run in, get the awareness going, let people know what we're up to with the new podcast. Obviously, an hour-long YouTube video of us just essentially looking at each other and talking. Not the most exciting content that we can be producing for the channel, so we're going to save a lot of time on the production end of things, work on other video projects with that time, and do the podcast audio only. We'll probably look at still posting it just with like the sound wave, and then we will come back occasionally and do a video podcast as well.
Yeah.
But that won't be a consistent thing, and we've seen how basically the mediums that people are using has transitioned from YouTube over into other things, which is awesome. So
YouTube views down,
YouTube down, but iTunes
downloads
way higher, which is cool. So I think the awareness has kind of gotten where it needs to be, and now we can flip the switch to using video as we really should be in a much more productive way, which is great. And then finally, Game of Thrones. Right? So you have to talk about it. Had the season premiere, and consequently with this, seemingly unrelated, I watched the season premiere, which I think
sort of related.
We could have some words about that, which I thought was an excellent episode. And then I saw the latest Game of Thrones preview on
For the
Fantasy
first pack
Flights.
of the next cycle.
The first pack of the next cycle. And in the background, there's a Greyjoy card. And it's a wizened, if not beat down, post-drowning kind of Greyjoy character.
With like a wave.
Wild beard and, got some robes, like a drowned god kind of a theme. Giant wave cresting over the top. And all that you can see is the name is something waves. And I saw that card, and I immediately was like, what do I need to do to get all fully caught up and back in?
I need back in, I need to use that card.
I haven't really played Game of Thrones in a serious way, like we competed at Destiny at Worlds. I had no intention of competing in November. Like, it's just not, I play it every now and again. But now it's kind of like every pack, every box, like, is it time, can I get back into this? Simply because of this one card.
So you have the premiere, you have the card. Is there going to be a Steve Mully sighting at Worlds?
Well, here's the thing. We've talked about the importance of theme in games and what it can do and can't do. What Game of Thrones can do, because of the theme, is show me a card with a drowned god themed entity and a very heavy water motif happening, and then say waves on it. And I'm so
ding, 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 ding.
I'm so obsessed with that as theme that it literally just jump starts my excitement about something.
Nice.
So it's pretty amazing. And L5R is similar to me, where they have an entire water thing going on there. So, I mean, it's a cheap shot. It's easy, but my goodness, do I love that idea of water and drowned gods stuff.
And we have also been consistently hearing from the people who play at the store, etc., that Thrones is in the best place.
Better than it's ever been.
This new designer is
here.
doing a great job.
Danny's good. You got the card pool.
Yeah.
I mean,
growing.
Thrones needs a card pool like none other, because this is a game that is literally built around a universe that is literally built around everybody dying. So you can only have so many characters. If you have 5 guys to work with, it's like, well, they're all dead now. I got nothing else to play. So you have to have this very, very big card pool. And I think we finally hit that. And the Thrones community at large is saying, could not be more pleased where the game is. But now the question is, you have L5R coming out. How much of the audience is that going to pull off? And then, so let's say Game of Thrones is good right now. Like, it's hit its moment. It's mecca. We talked about sustainability. We've talked about all sorts of LCG topics on the podcast. Well, now you have to go to somebody and say, are you willing to buy the 3 cycles to get here? And that's the problem. I think that's the thing we consistently are realizing about LCGs. And how can we fix that problem? Not sure. But it is a daunting thing to look at this and say, I love this one card. So now how many dollars is it going to cost me to get all the way caught up to where I can start participating in this world that you tell me is incredible? And that's actual in the flesh relevant things that are going on with LCGs. But I will end it with this. I'm playing tonight in the store.
Well.
For a couple hours. Brian's coming into town, so I've got to go eat dinner with him.
But get some Thrones on.
For a couple hours, yeah.
I'm excited to see
Josh
that.
Forbes is bringing a Greyjoy deck in, and I'm just going to play a game or two.
Josh.
Nice.
See where it is.
I'm excited to hear your report on that.
I'm excited too, man. So let's talk about the premiere, can we?
Yeah, I was going to say, so
get that out of there.
big things Thrones happened, and for me, with the Thrones card game, actually, it's kind of the same problem with the first episode of the Thrones premiere, which is you have this expectation that you're going to have these large fire-breathing dragons raining death and destruction upon Westeros.
Which is a Zach theme, right? So
Yeah.
that's the kind of theme that would get you very excited.
Yes, just total conquering, which is why I like the Dothraki as well.
I'm glad you're the CEO. Man.
Worked out.
Yeah, I mean, you go to Vader, you go to all these themes, and it's like
Yeah.
someone that can just walk in and like wreck the place, which is a dragon. Anyways, the premiere was awesome. Totally lacked any fire-breathing dragons. You saw them flying around a little bit, and then ended in like spoiler alert. Ended in like
big spoiler alert. Yeah, it was probably.
ended in
there's
like
nothing really to spoil though. Is the thing. That's the whole point of
the,
what we're talking
the
about.
point is that like you get to the end and it's like Dany's walking on Dragonstone. It's like, oh my goodness, this is gonna be awesome. And then like she says, "Let's begin."
Yeah.
and it's like.
And then it was it.
Yeah.
And
I thought this episode was the beginning.
I got pitched. This was so funny because I was talking to everybody about this Thrones premiere because I hadn't been caught up in the shows. I'm pretty lazy when it comes to keeping up with Thrones. I haven't read the books, any of that. And somebody called me out on YouTube like, this guy doesn't seem like he knows anything about the Song of Ice and Fire.
I was going to say, specifically the Song of Ice and Fire.
Definitely don't. Caught me.
Red hands.
So I heard about all this and I'm like, all right, Zach, just give me, can you catch me up? And he's like, well, here's the deal, man. The entire past X seasons have all been building to this one moment. And so now it's just like nonstop action is about to go down. And then we get this first episode that is more building. It's more conversations, it's more back. It's like something's about to happen, just constantly this feeling, something's about to happen. And then it ends with like, something's about to happen. So we didn't actually get anywhere.
We didn't progress the
No,
story.
I mean, they did
further.
open with like the Arya scene.
Great.
Stuff happens, right?
And
There
it was
is things
beautiful.
happening.
I mean, and it's shot so well. It's really good.
There's actually, not to mention other YouTube videos I continue to do, but Lessons from the Screenplay, another great video essay YouTube channel, just did one on the Battle of the Bastards and how the showrunners and editors, etc. at Game of Thrones do such a great job of using filmic language to build and then subvert expectations. It's fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah.
that was actually one of the best episodes of TV.
The Battle of the Bastards? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Scott, Steven's a sucker for those long shots. Anytime that you just don't cut for forever.
Man,
Yeah.
100%. I will say this, the end of Game of Thrones, first of all, I loved it all. The conversations, I thought it was really good. Just like the writing was good. But whenever it was the end where they land, first of all, I'm like, is there going to be like a Greyjoy fleet that's about to like sideline this approach?
Yeah.
Was my first concern. I was like, okay, it's not happening. I would have loved that. But it's like, probably would have got dragoned up, and Euron knows that. So then they land, but during the entire scene, all the way to the throne, who's in the front of the entire entourage? It's Dany. And I'm thinking, if Cersei had any amount, it's like put it in the tea.
Yeah.
Could literally have a spearman standing behind any number of 12 doors. And they open up and it's like, all right, Queen's dead. Why would you ever do that?
Now, there's a couple things worth noting. She did have Unsullied, like
Behind her?
opening the doors. No, so they would like open the door and then she walked through.
expose her fully.
But what we are assuming here
Crossbow.
is that they didn't have scouts
They didn't sweep the place.
that swept the place, which I'm not certain they didn't not have. Because he wouldn't
I
just,
mean-
here's the thing, right? You wouldn't just show up
Tyrion
to
wouldn't
a
let that
castle and like hope no one's home.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like no one's been home. We have hundreds of ships around here.
All right, that's fair. But at least put 3 or 4 bodies in front of her.
Yeah.
At all times.
Yeah.
Dude, she's a Targaryen, man.
And also-
She's like,
and-
I'm kissed by fate. You can't kill me.
The amount of Euron throwing a knife in that scene that could have happened right at her. You know he can throw a knife. You know that's a guy that can throw a
Oh,
knife.
he can throw knives.
And you know that you would never find it if he didn't want you to find it as he was approaching, right? Euron's the kind of guy, the knife's somewhere. You can never pat it down and find it. So I'm just saying, she needs to be careful.
I think my bigger question, that scene was actually shot really well because there's like no talking. And it's just like her like big moment to finally come back home. But my question is, we talked about this after the premiere, but it's like in a video game when you get the capacity to like run or fly or ride a bike, you don't ever go back. And so
Yeah.
like, you ever thought about taking your dragon up there?
just right to the top.
So
Let everybody else walk.
It seems safer
That's right.
and way faster and like
why were you
way
ever on
more
the boat to begin with?
Yeah, it's like, if I could ride a dragon, there's no going back. You're never seeing me on walking, or like my legs are gonna go bad.
Just attach me to the dragon.
Send a raven up to Zach's dragon.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on? That's right.
I thought it was good. I mean, obviously the comedy of the Sam scene was not lost.
So good.
That was a nice reprieve from kind of the typical Game of Thrones pacing that is.
And
can
it
be
showed,
pretty intense.
it showed some sophistication is the word that comes to mind, but I think it's probably something else of the actual editors to show they have a varied talent. They can do comedy, they can do that sort of comedic montage, as well as make these things happen.
All in one episode.
From an editor's perspective,
Also,
I think
Arya's terrifying at this point.
Yeah,
I mean, like
Arya.
there's no amount of stopping whatever might be coming from that.
Let vengeance rain down.
And Arya's perfect for the series because she challenges everything about what it means to be a hero or a villain, just perfectly. And everybody in Game of Thrones who's watching just wants their sweet revenge. And then you go back and think about all the bad things that happened to begin with, stemmed from that exact same principle of getting revenge on a past grievance. And it's like, you're no different than anybody else in this series.
But we
you're
know
just as bad.
we know your trauma, so we root for you.
Yeah,
We relate
that's
to
right.
you.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's
The
what
North
Jamie,
remembers.
Jamie was a bad guy until we realized how messed up his childhood was.
One
And we're
of the
like,
major
okay.
themes of Thrones is that
It's
the bad
true,
guys
yeah.
don't see themselves as bad guys.
Yeah, that thing
And then
is-
the good
that's its
guys are
strength.
maybe ultimately bad guys. I don't know.
Or maybe we're all just
Good and
people.
bad just isn't really Westeros. It's just
or
not.
or that people have reasons for doing what they do.
Sure.
Whether or not
Yeah.
they're correct or good or just.
Thank
or
God we
bad.
finally learned that.
So outside of Thrones, I had a couple notable things happen, and then we'll get to the actual episode, which is I saw for the second time in my life the living legend, Sir Paul McCartney,
Oh, nice.
which is fantastic.
Polly M,
I Polly M. Yeah.
as
Polly.
nobody calls him.
No. That's not even how it's written. Anyways, I did that. I also actually got my hands on Dark Souls, the board game.
Yes, tell me all about it, Zach. I've been waiting so much to hear.
Well, that's a future episode, my friend. But the shortest version is it's designed principally by DC, old designer that
David
I
Carl
really
himself.
enjoyed. He was a lead developer on Monster Apocalypse for a long time, which is a game we
and
were into.
outstanding human being. It should be
And
noted.
pretty great person.
Consequently,
So check that out. Had a really good time. The like character building, sort of like it falls somewhere in between a board game, a miniatures game, and a role playing game. Right? You're playing a character. You're building a character. There's miniatures happening, and it also is a single box release that is a board, and you play on a table and that kind of thing. So a very cool mix of the three. I'm not traditionally a role player or a board gamer.
Right.
So that was interesting, and I still had a really good time.
Nice.
It was very
nice.
well designed.
Here's the question. The critiques that I've seen reviews of the game are that it is an unenjoyable and unfulfilling slog through mechanics, basically. That they've achieved something in that it feels similar to a Dark Souls video game, but that is actually not the better for it. Did you get the sense that
Like
it
the
was
chili dog pizza.
Yeah,
They did it.
they did it, but nobody wanted it.
No one really wanted it.
Yeah.
So
Was it fun? I mean, was it?
I've obviously only played once, so we had the like super extended hour-long learning period to like get it set up and know what we were doing. It's not that complex, really. Like none of the concepts were like.
Once you know it kind of a thing.
Yeah, and well, it's even just like sometimes in games, a concept about how to do something is complex. There's nothing you're doing that they're telling you to do. They're walking you through it, and it's like, oh, that's logical and simple, and like logical and simple. But there's just a lot of stuff happening. So there's that. I think for us, it was you go into the first room the first time you're playing it, and you beat that room, and you go to the second room, and it's a little harder, and then you go to the third room. It's like there was a moment when we went to that third room that was like we have to like think and be strategic here. Then you get to the fourth room and you die, so you start back over. And now you do the first room that was easy in the first place, and you even do that better.
Yeah, you start to exhibit mastery.
And it's faster and more effective. And you do the second room, and so you kind of recur, and it does have that grindy, because you're going to die and you're going to have to restart. But you're gaining experience and upgrading along the way. And so even the easier rooms get easier, both because of just your development and also your capacity to do it better.
Yeah.
And once you've
That's a good feeling.
experienced, but I think the answer for me would be like, why are you playing Dark Souls if that's not the experience you're looking?
Like a
that-
challenging, kind of grindy, build a character.
I think
experience.
that's the most important part, where it's like, if this is what you need to know what you're getting into, because if you don't, then you're probably not going to enjoy it. But I knew what I was getting into, and like it was really cool to go from like really weak and not knowing how to play the game to stronger and also knowing how to play the game.
Yeah.
And one of the cooler parts is that they basically each room tells you the difficulty of the encounter, stage 1, 2, or 3, and the stage 2, which was the room 3 we were at, is slightly more complex and requires like forethought, and like you can't just like go beat stuff up and live because you have health. And there's a penalty to that. You know, using various parts of your repertoire to like get through stages, and you want to save things for the end. But I think the cool thing is the rooms themselves, the monsters or bad guys that are in it, the treasures that are in it, the obstacles that are in it, the way you have to solve it, is completely changes every time.
Nice.
So you may have the same end boss, but like everything in the middle is going to be different in a different order, and there's a big stack of each of those. So like it's going to be very varied, and I think.
And then expansions.
And then
presumably start to really.
I think that would be really important. And each map tile has a front and a back side, and so like where certain parts are in the room, you might get the exact same encounter, but it's like, you know, this guy goes on this icon on the map, and it's like it could be a different spot.
Cool.
It could be right next to you in one room and not on the other.
So I mean, the question ultimately is, was it fun? Did you have fun?
I had a lot of
Because
fun.
you guys got to the mini boss.
Mini boss,
That's,
yeah.
that's as far as you were going to go. On your last life, no chances left, no continues, and you beat it.
We did.
And so was that a fun experience? Was that did you feel rewarded? Was it worth the time that you invested?
Absolutely. Even as just a one shot, they do have the campaign mode, which I'm more interested in.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which like it tells a story and like recurs, and like you build
cool.
your character throughout. And I would be interested in playing that. So like
Okay.
that was a good sign.
If you'd play it again, that's the most
Yeah.
important thing. Yeah.
For sure. But yeah, it was very enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, we did the demo at Adepticon, and there was something sort of, it had that sort of, I'm using this term all the time now, but je ne sais quoi, and it was just fun. It was fun, and didn't know why it was fun necessarily. It was fun above the sum of its mechanical parts. And so to hear that's still the case, it sounds like, so that's good. I'm still very interested in playing.
Yeah. Super good. All right, let's dive in. First things first, what is role-playing?
What is role-playing? A very good question, and actually relevant considering Dark Souls.
Yeah, very relevant.
Yes.
Okay, so there's actually a long history of this conversation that we had in the car on the way to Worlds, or Adepticon.
I wasn't. It was
Adepticon.
World. Nah, I think it was Worlds because I wasn't there.
It must have been Worlds then,
It was
yeah.
Worlds, and
Okay.
it was the two of us and Ben.
Yeah.
And we were essentially trying to sort out the kind of logical, maxim that captured all role-playing games and excluded all things that we felt weren't really
Right.
role-playing games. But inevitably, whatever definition we threw up, to us, role-playing games seem to always find their way into the category, right? So if it was about playing a role, are you ultimately playing a role in something like Shadows of Catan? That is a fictional setting in which we're playing a role as a builder or something else. And then if it's about
As a
talking
settler.
in a certain way or accents or, acting, well then somebody who's playing Dungeons and Dragons rolling dice and saying I'm going there, I'm going here, and is not, talking in an accent or is not responding in terms of, like having active dialogue around the table, because there are people who play role-playing games like that. My character is going to go here, my character is going to do that, my character is going to try to bargain, but is not going to actually role-play out the scenario. And so then that would exclude those players, which are clearly role-playing. So, and even when you think about Dark Souls, where are you going to draw the line between I'm embodying a character on a board, making decisions that is ultimately developing that character? So is that a role-playing game?
Yeah, and because the role that I've been assigned is influencing my decisions. So if I'm a fighter, I'm like, Gorak or whatever the fighter, I'm going to approach situations as Gorak would if I'm doing it correctly. But how do you deal with that when you do something like Resistance, where I'm a spy, I'm going to lie like a spy does, which is outside of your normal role as a human being, or you can go as far as some other game that I just completely forgot.
Well, I think for
Any
me,
number of other games.
Or Netrunner, where it's like I'm Wizard, but Wizard's mechanics say that my role as Wizard should be to play the game in this such a way.
Yeah,
so
to
it's
trash
even
assets.
even this character sheet, which is the identity card, is influencing my
and
choices.
I literally haven't parsed this at all. And I know you guys had the car conversation, so I'm
Yes.
excited to see where that went. But, I'm thinking about Dark Souls. I'm even thinking about Imperial Assault. And the reality is, like, when I play Imperial Assault, I'm not, like, my character might be Garkin or
Right.
Gideon.
Right.
And it's like, I am manipulating Gideon on the board and concerned with Gideon and concerned with how to make Gideon effective in my group and make him play his role. But there's also definitely a gap between, like, I'm not assuming the role of Gideon. Like,
Right.
I'm not trying to talk like Gideon. Or I'm also in Imperial Assault, this is just maybe my proclivity of how I play games because I'm trying to be efficient. But, like, I'm not trying to ask well, how would Gideon in particular play this?
Yeah. But you are asking, how can I maximize the mechanics on Gideon's card?
Yes.
Which makes you play.
But like, you know, the commander who like is sending signals over the radio and moving people around may play differently than me knowing, well, if I go block this line of movement for the stormtrooper, he can't get to my guy, and I can like. There's like a separation. I'm not fully embodying that.
Mm-hmm. We ultimately came down to motivation as the I think the key concept of how you might define it. Let me read you the undeniable definition from Wikipedia, of course. The
source of all truth.
Source of all truth, crowdsourced truth.
Which I trust more than
players assume roles of characters in a fictional setting. Okay. Players take on the responsibility for acting out roles either through literal actions or acting, or a process of structured decision-making or character development. Choose your own adventure kind of book, right? Structured decision-making, so rolling dice to do a thing.
Even in a sense of like, you're playing Dungeons,
look at that.
Dungeons. Yeah. If you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, clearly a role-playing game.
Yeah.
The reality of if you're playing the warrior character, you are actually asking the question, what would the warrior character do, and how would he do it? And this is honestly the difference. Let me. So to make it clear to everybody listening, a role-playing game in the traditional sense that if you've never heard of a role-playing game or you've never engaged in one, it is traditionally seen as tabletop role-playing, sitting around a table. One person is the game master, dungeon master, narrator, has a number of names. But they are basically in charge of the narrative. And so then you, who are non-GMs or dungeon masters or whatever, you are the players in the game. And you're embodying a character in the narrative that's being spun up or told by the narrator. And the way that you manipulate that narrative changes and is considered based on your character, right? So in a proper role-playing context for me, if I'm playing a thief who believes certain things, who has a certain, as much as you want to get a certain background, those kinds of things, and the narrator says, you know, you view a noble in front of you in the alley, you know, laughing, maybe a little bit drunk on wine. What do you want to do? Stephen, as a person, would not think to go take money out of his pocket. Right. But embodying that thief, saying, you know, this thief has been through a lot, has not had a lot of money, has obviously like kind of taken this ethos of robbing from the rich to help the poor, like these kinds of things. So I think I'm going to go try to steal from this person, even though I would never do that in real life. And that's where we've crossed the threshold between my decisions and considering the decisions from a different persona. Now, the foil to that is, what if this person playing the thief, me in this instance, knows that the role set that's being played has a very high chance of getting this thief killed because a noble probably has guards and that role is going to be really hard, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then decides to not do what he ultimately thinks the thief would do because it would mechanically have an impact or be unlikely to succeed. So have they then stopped role-playing in that instance? I think that's ultimately kind of where this curiosity lies. Well, and I would wonder if a role-playing game that would not facilitate characters being the characters probably is just a weaker role-playing game.
Just worse.
Because like you don't want the thief to not be able to be the thief. Now, the other sense of this is maybe you're in a city with like really stringent laws, and it's like a known thing, and it's like, well, it's riskier to be a thief here, and my thief would know it's riskier. Is it broad daylight? Is it 2 a.m? Are there people around? And so the thief might check, right?
Yeah.
And so a system that allows characters to embody that role is probably the ideal one. Which is why I feel like you guys liked Burning Wheel so much, and I won't speak to why you did. But it introduced the idea of the beliefs and the motivations.
Yeah.
It's like, because that's really what drives a character.
And I think the modern role-playing games have started to go this direction. That's really the split, honestly the split between the new way of what I would say role-playing and the traditional. Because it stemmed out of this idea that the players were against the dungeon master.
Right. The
overlord, the person who is throwing challenges at you, and then you are trying to essentially mechanically overcome them as characters, but the motivations of your character were never baked into the system. Like role-playing groups eventually spun out of this and decided that that was best for them, and the DM became less abrasive and more storytelling. But now, like, I think the new wave is wholesale about storytelling.
Well, and a quick history, because I think this would shed some light on things, of role-playing, is it was really born out of miniatures gaming, which is really born out of wargaming, and so which is really born out of people setting up tableaus of, like, anything. So basically what would happen is that they would have these, big battles, and then it would be like, they would start thinking, well, in between the battles, what happens? What happens to my general? And so then they kind of developed a rule set based on some of the early combat mechanics, which is why Dungeons & Dragons especially is mostly combat based when it comes to mechanics. But you can start to see the evolution. Well, what happens to him outside? Okay, well, he gets in a bar fight, he goes in dungeons. Okay, well, but what happens to him, like, when he goes home and there's no fighting to do? Like, what about that development? And so you start to move more towards the emotional side of things, more towards the character building side of things. And I think the new wave of role-playing games is a progression of that, where instead of just like you built in combat mechanics, or you built in mechanics for how a person lived a rough and tumble life, now you're building in mechanics about how they think and feel and move between situation and situation. It's really cool to see.
Well, and I think early form role-playing games, early D&D, early all that stuff, feels a lot more like Descent or Imperial Assault or Dark Souls, where the goal of the GM was to set this quest up and then, like, challenge the players to make it through the quest. And it could be adversarial or not, but it's like, I create this tough story, it's rough for you to get through, and you get to the big bad monster at the end, and there's definitely, that's a game. Like, there's a reason people want to play.
And it's chunky. Like, most of the time, those early ideas were very chunky in that if you didn't know the system and how to play it, you would never beat the Dungeon Master. You had to be able to say, aha, I have caught you. This monster here is actually very susceptible to this thing, and I have prepared this spell ahead of time, like, I got you, Dungeon Master.
Yeah.
And then they'd be like, oh, you tricked me, kind of a thing. I guess you do beat the dragon after all. But if you didn't know the system, it was impossible.
Well,
right?
and that's where, I would question because you guys played that early on.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You played early D&D. So I feel like you experienced this, which is you play that and then you realize, well, really the fun that's happening here is not beating the dragon.
Right.
It's like, I got to play the thief, and like I stole from the dragon.
And now, to be fair, we were watching Mystery Science Theater last night, and it was the Hercules one.
The new one, yeah.
Yeah, and between that and
movie.
between the Conan with Arnold Schwarzenegger, like, this is a viable form of entertainment. Like, going through dungeons, slashing stuff is fun, and I don't think we should run roughshod over that in our desire to get to sort of explain the new
For
wave.
sure.
Certainly.
But like,
so there is that. Because, like, we back in the
That's
back
great.
in the day,
I still love that. Torchbearer is still that.
Yeah, Torchbearer is still at its core. Yeah, that Diablo, even Dark Souls.
And I think that's where, to me, it's like with something like Imperial Assault, right? Like, you have these games that are built just for that,
right?
And are built to facilitate that and like make that a faster. Like, you can do a dungeon crawl way more just way quicker and way more efficient and way easier to understand than you can with a GM having to, like, craft a campaign to create a dungeon crawl, right?
Here's the other piece of that, though, and this is where I think the newer wave is fascinating, is that how different is that dungeon crawl whenever you have just role-played out a scene where you are saying goodbye to your wife, right?
Right.
That's something that Imperial Assault is never going to accomplish.
Sure.
Is that amount of buy-in where it's like, my decision about pursuing that ghoul or not just got a lot different whenever, my 2 kids saw me out the door as I headed off for the Adventurers Guild.
Yeah.
And so having those actual emotional moments role played out frames a very different kind of gaming experience than just going down and crushing stuff. And both of them are awesome in their own way, right? Like, I like watching Below Deck and reality TV as much as anybody. That's my dungeon crawl. But then sometimes, you get into a more meaningful, if you want to say that, kind of experience. It's
Yeah.
like I'll watch a very sad movie too, or I'll watch, and sometimes I just want to. So there are various ways to enrich yourself.
Yeah, and you see culture moving this way too. I mean, look at superhero movies, Batman in particular. Like you start out, it's a beat 'em up, right? You know, he has an adventure, he beats someone up, the end, right? And now you have like him dealing with what it means to be Batman, especially against the Joker, as is the famous case. So I think as a society at large, we have seen now this sort of Gilgamesh level epic kind of stuff, and we are now looking for the other conflicts that may be more exciting or more subtle. And they also, as Steve was just saying, help supplement and really build emotion into those final climactic fight scenes.
Well, and I think early role-playing was more about recreating the dungeon crawl than it was, why is that general fighting?
Yeah.
And I'm sure there were ultimately a lot of exceptions during this period too. I mean, the number of tiny systems that I will never even know about that tried out crazy ideas like no combat or no dice, these kinds of things, have always been there. These systems.
Yeah.
So it's hard to catch them all. It's very hard to keep track of the entire line. Role-playing games, many of which were printed out at a convention one day and handed to somebody. So. Not to say that these ideas haven't always existed, but it seems like the acceptance and the mainstream is moving in that direction when it comes to role-playing.
Definitely getting traction.
So when it comes to role-playing, and what we're kind of saying here is what is role-playing, which is this massive category of games that people play for a very number of reasons, and it's everything from dungeon crawls to no fighting whatsoever. I forget the Periscope.
Microscope.
Microscope.
Yeah. Microscope,
Just this crazy little rule set, little game, and it's played it for hours. And
to Fiasco, to Dread, to where you're literally integrating Jenga into the situation. And
that
all
is
sorts of
hilarious.
stuff.
I love that. So what is it about RPGs? I know both of you have played them since you were young.
Yes.
And also
Very
have played quite a few of them and kind of consistently played them throughout your whole life. What is it about RPGs that really draws you to them? Because I know, I haven't ever really, back to the dove question.
Yeah.
I haven't really gone super deep into RPGs. I know I had some encounters with D&D in school and had to keep it on the hush-hush because of the whole 90s scare of Dungeons & Dragons. And have played Star Wars RPG occasionally and Periscope or Microscope or whatever it was called. But for you, the two of you, what is it about RPGs that keep bringing you back to this format?
It's worth mentioning that you have always preferred controlling the narrative.
That's right.
And I have typically always preferred. Now we've switched around a lot recently, but I've typically always preferred to play.
Yeah.
So we might have different takes. So.
That's true. Well, one of the thing that I would start off saying, and this is something that Steve and I talked about a long time ago, but the way that I see particularly the benefit of role-playing games is that it is a kind of travel. And I say that as someone who has done a fair amount of traveling, especially back in the day. You get to basically go with your friends to see a foreign land, to have experiences that can only happen in that foreign land, and then bond with those people that are with you through the shared experience. And there's definitely shared experiences in board games, and there's definitely shared experiences in everything else. But because so much of the role-playing takes place in this sort of collective imagination, that's why people love telling stories about their role-playing sessions. It's the same reason people love showing slides of their latest vacation, right? It's they're reliving this very palpable thing, and that's also why a lot of people don't like hearing people's role-playing stories and don't like
slides.
or watching
Because they didn't experience it.
because
There's
they
no
didn't
context,
experience
yeah.
it. But you, with that group around the table, you have experienced something profound that I think hits and would probably signal the same pathways of the brain as actual travel does. So it's a group travel where you're all ultimately around the table, but your minds are just like you're in a foreign land, and I think that's really cool.
That's fantastic. I think one of the things for me is I've consistently and always been obsessed with the concept of freedom, and really just feeling like you're capable of exploring any and every option in front of you at any time. Even in my own personal life, freedom is the major concept that drives most of my decision making. So I think that role-playing games offer players a sense of freedom that you otherwise never experience in your life. There's a lot of external forces on a normal existence, whether it's paying the bills or staying employed, etc., that take away a lot of, or that make it really hard to choose other than continuing the 9 to 5 or whatever it is. And in a role-playing game, it's very much, I'm free to do anything with consequences.
Right.
But those consequences are not felt in my everyday experience like they would be if I went out and decided to start adventuring in real life. So there's a freedom there that is so addicting to me that you get to create and be anything you want, which is the first I get to reset. Like I can do something that is totally not my usual. I can create anything that I want and experience it. You don't get that chance in reality, right? This is you. And
you got to play this person 100% of the time.
And you're stuck with it. Yeah, you can maybe reinvent a little bit, but you have that, and then you can take that thing and you can put it. You can just explore. Do you want to go in that building or not? Do you want to go in the dungeon or not? Do you want to talk to this person or not?
And how do you want to talk to him?
And how do you want to talk to him? And having that freedom and bouncing it back and forth off of other people who are in the same place is just fantastic. I mean, it gives me the sweats.
There's a really interesting case. Ever since this happened, this was a few years ago, but my friend Josh had us play a GURPS campaign where we literally made ourselves. We even went so far as to see how much we could lift based on the rules, and that was our strength, and how fast we could run, and that was our dexterity and all that stuff. The weird thing about that is, besides some random lycanthropy that happened, I think one of us could turn into an owl or something. Most of us, after about the 4th session, were looking for a 9 to 5. We got sent back into this fantasy world, and it's I don't want to fight the dangerous stuff. I want to live in my house, maybe look for a partner, and just get some cash flow. And it's it was astounding because none of us could really fight this pull. It's no, this is me. And that's the cool thing about being careful. That's the cool thing about creating that character is you can say
that's a wild experiment.
I am attached to this thing, but if it dies, well, that's fine. If it's me, it's I'm attached to this thing in a much more profound way, and I want to just make sure that there's food on the table.
I wonder, that's a fascinating thought experiment because...
Oh, it's all fascinating thought experiments.
Because if you're role-playing yourself in a game, right, it's a little meta, a little matrix here, but if you're role-playing yourself in a game, if your decisions are exactly as they are in real life...
It's very weird.
Then I feel like you are absolutely just doing... exactly what you should be doing. But when you take a risk off the table, true risk, I know I can't die, I know I can't starve in an RPG. I mean, I can, but it's not actually me.
Right, yeah.
I know that even if I fail, it doesn't matter. I'm just destitute in the game and not in real life.
You can just say, well, I'll do another character.
But it's really interesting to me to consider how you would act, you as a person would act, knowing that you can't ultimately fail like that.
And yet
there's really something about that that's kind of blowing my mind right now.
And yet still choosing to not take the risk.
Because in real life, it can only go so bad. Really. This is a whole different direction.
It's
for people like me who maybe have had a lot less RPG experience.
Sure.
Do either of you have notable recommendations of RPGs that would be good to cut your teeth on?
Boy, that's...
Well, yeah, the thing is, we've been role-playing since I was potentially 8. I don't know if we nailed down whenever that started happening.
I think you were 8.
And I was running dungeon crawls for Steven, who was 5, and my dad, who was somewhat older than us, or quite a bit older than us, I guess. That's how the system works. The core, it's much growing up playing card games, the core of this is my deck, this is I tap, and then this is, that kind of stuff is built into us for role-playing games. So really, it's just sort of a couple of new mechanics on top of an old understanding.
I already understood.
It would be... I would like recommendations from listeners on that because Burning Wheel is not straight up that is to potentially its detriment as it is, and admittedly so by Luke, a crunchy mechanical system that incentivizes a more free choice-based role-playing experience, but not until you get there. Before you get there, it's rather daunting. Torchbearer is pared down, I think probably very good, especially if you have experience with some dungeon crawling games like Diablo and stuff like that. You can kind of get yourself into it that way. But as far as just simple, easy games, probably D&D at this point is probably trying to simplify itself.
I think it's pretty streamlined. Yeah. I think it's to a point where you can kind of lizard brain in really quick to that experience. And it's kind of like what we've always been told, which is you can't adequately perform free verse poetry until you know the rules that you're breaking. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of the role-playing systems that we're into now are only really appreciated when you have the expectation of what a role-playing game is that you're breaking
And
down.
it subverts that expectation.
And that you're seeing like, oh, I understand how this is doing it differently and better and this way and worse in this way. So you almost have to have that bedrock.
Yeah.
And it really is like a Dungeons and Dragons or a GURPS or something that's just trying to, kind of replicate that traditional role-playing experience. Because I would never say that your first, shot should be with, if it's a totally like a brand new group, Torchbearer and those kinds of things just wouldn't work. If you have somebody who's run these games before, who's very experienced, who's bringing people in, I think you could pull off most anything.
Sure.
But I would say that the more structured at first is going to be the better for newer players. So D&D is built for big audiences, and it really does a great job.
Yeah,
a great job
they have worked very hard to get it that
at
way.
making it happen. So you probably should start there.
Maybe D&D. I don't have enough RPG experience to make a recommendation, but I have heard, and I think even Josh is on this page, that the latest Star Wars RPG is actually
I've heard nothing but good
it's very
things about it.
But see, that's the thing is that if you understand D&D and how rolling works traditionally, pass or fail, those kinds of things, then if you move into the Star Wars role-playing system where you're using narrative dice, you only truly appreciate the narrative dice mechanic when you realize what it traditionally is.
What it looked like before.
When you go from pass-fail to pass with consequences or fail with successes, like, it's a total, you're like, this is great. I
very cool.
understand
This is
this.
what I've been
I
missing,
truly
yeah.
understand this. And all that the Star Wars role-playing game is a more structured way of doing what a lot of the indie stuff is doing. And then you have games like Dungeon World and Fiasco that are a lot more free-form, but also are great little systems.
Yeah.
So it's just, man, it's really hard. It's really hard to really just say, like, this is how you should do it.
Yeah, it really is. There's not, to my knowledge, there is not sort of a love letter version of role-playing games. There's not that.
There's not the intro, the Catan of board games.
Right.
If you're a brand new group, you probably just should go with Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
The classic.
They probably have learned to
I'm
plays
sure there's
and all
like
that stuff lined out.
intro scenarios and all
And
that
you can
kind
find
of
YouTube
stuff.
videos, people doing it.
Maybe
It is worth noting that Torchbearer is just about, they've got a Kickstarter right this very moment about an intro scenario for Torchbearer.
Yeah.
I had no idea that was a
Is that
thing.
what the Stone Dragon Mountain is? That's an intro?
Yeah,
Oh, it is, and it's a
they're
campaign.
paging the whole thing like an intro.
That's really cool.
It just
well,
ended.
hey, look, there you go. Good recommendation. So maybe a little more meta. If you can't recommend a specific game,
Okay.
for people who are looking to get into an RPG,
Right.
whether it's a player or a GM, I know on a past episode it was like any GM advice, and Jonathan went
Yeah.
on a 25-minute soliloquy. But any advice for new players of RPGs, whether participants or creators/leaders/GMs, any general, low experience, doesn't know what's happening going in, anything on top of mind for either of you?
GM meaning Game Master, of course.
Yeah.
So I would say probably the following. First of all, you don't have to act out. You don't. I think that's intimidating for a lot of people. They think of role playing as sitting around a table and having to have these. We come back to it. Accents. It was really the most indicative, way of saying I'm somebody else. It's like I'm talking in a different voice. You don't have to do any of that. Like that's not a necessary component of the role playing game. You will get into that, I think, over time. Just embodying a character more fully and being willing to take chances and put yourself in vulnerable situations as a human being. Just to like literally
Real talk.
take a chance on the group, either accepting that you're going for it or being like, who is this weirdo who's really just like playing this character 100%. You'll get there, but there's no need to start there. So the barrier of entry is actually very small. Just read about the mechanics and kind of learn how the system works. And you can play the game at first just very simply. Do you want to take this risk or not? Do you want to try to fight this thing or not? And start to just unravel a little bit. Start to understand and feel and recognize that ultimately the game is at its best whenever your character is being played in a way that doesn't consider your biases and your prejudices as a person. That you can, the more you can distance yourself from the character that you're playing, the more enriching and the more buy-in there's ultimately going to be. And so work towards that. But you don't have to like really throw it all in at the beginning, because that can be uncomfortable. And honestly, groups that are brand new, there will be discomfort.
It's a vulnerable. I mean, that's the thing. It's probably the most vulnerable that you're going to be. You're not going to be vulnerable when you're playing a card game, right?
Right.
Like no one's going to be like, this guy emotionally isn't what I wanted. You know, that's possible. But at least
don't go there.
Not within the context of the game. You know what I mean? Because since this is a group sort of, if you want to imagine like a bubble over the table where everybody's imagination is sort of feeding in, if you have, similar to the creation story in Lord of the Rings, someone who is discordant with that, that can really throw things off. And until you learn how to have that harmony, if we want to get really fancy about it, it can be it can be tough.
You feel vulnerable, man.
You feel
exposed. It's very similar. Like Sharon and I have been married forever. Well, we've been together forever. Married almost a year, and she still is very afraid to like sing in front of me. But it's that kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like imagine right now you're just like, hey, sing a song for the podcast, and it's like, I'll be judged and that kind of stuff. So those kinds of things do come up as you get deeper and deeper into embodying a character. But it is so worth it. It is like nothing else that you can possibly experience through a game.
Yeah.
It is just like nothing else.
Yeah, it's a high risk, high reward sort of a thing. And I think like anything, especially like high risk, high reward situations, knowing that the goal is worth the fight is going to get you through potentially some tough beginnings.
And some groups never go there.
Yeah, some groups never go there.
Too.
And then again, you may like be playing like with us, people we knew our entire lives, and so like it's not a problem.
There.
Yeah, and so just know that establishing that rhythm, establishing that harmony is going to have to take place for the first couple of rounds. So like give and take, feel that out, and that'll be very helpful, I think.
Another thing, really good practical advice is talk about kind of expectations and those kinds of things before the session, before the game starts, and then after every session, like have a zoomed out talk about what went down. It's like, you were playing that character so well in these moments. Like that was really good. It was really cool. You should keep going that direction with that character.
Yeah.
I love that. And then it's like, I don't know, I didn't feel like you were feeling the session so much. Like, were you not being engaged or challenged? If you can have those kinds of candid conversations, it helps so much.
Yeah.
And just everybody getting on the same page about what is it that we're ultimately wanting to experience together. But I will also put another disclaimer on this, like the campaign that we had with Wave and Neomarth, I think all three of us at a certain point were brought to tears during that campaign. That's the level of buy-in that you can have whenever you really just start to sync up and make it like say that it's okay to embody these characters and situations in a way that you're so far removed that it's like getting really involved in a movie.
Yeah.
It's the exact same kind of thing. You're just like
connected to the emotion
you
of it.
lose yourself in the experience.
Yeah, that's sort of what you should be going towards, is being able to lose yourself in a story that ultimately you both control and are witnessing, because it's not you that's doing it, right? It's the character, and it's the character. Then this is the thing. I mean, really, any character that you build is some section of your own psychology. It has to be. It's the only way for you to be able to play it accurately. And it's really the only reason you would be drawn to it in the first place. I'm sure there are all sorts of personality tests out there based on what Street Fighter character you pick. Same idea, but writ large. So you're going
Ken,
to...
by the way.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, of course it's Ken. I could have called that from a mile away.
Ken. I'm a Guile man myself.
Of course. Of course he's Guile.
So yeah, it all
Did you
makes
have a
sense,
character?
right?
Yeah, Blanca, yeah.
Yeah, of course, man.
So like you're going to be getting in touch with that side of your personality, and like not to make any of this seem like unattainable or weird, but just to give accurate expectations if you want to get to this sort of like almost like the runner's high whenever you're running. Like if you get far enough into it, like you get rewarded by all of this. That's what can happen. Yeah, that's what can happen if you go down this path. And
It really sounds very culty.
I think for me, the thing I've realized about role-playing games is I feel like of all the different genres of tabletop games, they're the one with typically, at least they're the ones that facilitate the most, like an emotional connection.
Yeah.
Easily.
So in the way that like, in Destiny, me killing your Luke Skywalker, I'm not like emotional about it.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm winning the game. But like, I play something like Imperial Assault or Dark Souls, and it takes a step towards that direction.
Right.
Where all of a sudden Gideon dying isn't just a character getting off the board, but like he's a part of a
invested,
group. He's
yeah.
a character. It's they're gone, and if you've played games like Imperial Assault or Descent or Dark Souls or anything that kind of starts getting into a role playing game, and you've had a spark hit where it's like, oh, I was offering something that I haven't had before.
Yeah.
Role playing games is kind of the next step, and
Yep.
I think it's worth checking out.
And it goes into infinity past that.
Yeah, it can go as far as you want it to go,
It
right?
can literally go as far as you want.
It's like you were saying, it's like watching a movie, and all of a sudden it's like, whatever character you're playing isn't just a character anymore. Like, I've seen that character, hopefully, develop beliefs, experience things, grow, change, in the same way you watch a movie, right? And it's like, to watch some character that you've seen evolve and grow, go through something challenging, or someone who's had it rough to have another rough thing happen, and like you just can connect and be like, man, I just feel bad for them, or I'm excited when something good happens.
Yep.
Role playing kind of brings all that to bear, right? It puts those emotions out, and it allows you to take it as far as you want. It's just like in real life, like you can go as far or not as you want with those emotions.
Right. And I think it's something that naturally happens. I mean, even look at Dark Souls or Diablo on the computer. Like, as you have this blank slate that you begin to invest with your own decisions, those ties start getting very tight, and you get invested in it, like I was saying. So when it dies, it's a very sad thing.
Worth mentioning a couple of things here. Since you did bring up Diablo 3 broke from tradition and had a system where you could replace any number of your abilities and skills at any time if you're out of combat. So like, I'm casting fireballs 1 second, and now there's any monster, so I'll jump back here, switch to cold, and start casting, ice balls or snowflakes or whatever it is that I'm casting. And this came out of feedback from, I don't like that I feel so restricted by a bad decision I made at level 2, and now my talent tree is screwed up and I can't get to the thing that I want to get to. But the problem with that is Diablo 3 immediately, I had no buy-in to my character whatsoever. I was simply a warrior with any amount of any skills at any time. Right? But I wasn't that warrior. I wasn't my warrior.
You didn't have to build the warrior.
I didn't have to build it. Whereas in Diablo 2, which I would still play, I'm like, I have built this character to be a certain thing, and it can't help but be that thing. So there's actually a sense of that buy-in created whenever your decisions do have value and they stick with you. And when Diablo 3 ripped that out of the system, I think a lot of people lost that role-playing element of the game. And it just became an action, fight 'em.
Which is a very valid game. It's just not the game that people were used to getting from Diablo.
That's not.
Really
I think maybe at some point we can actually drill down to our very first question, which is, what is role playing? And I think role playing is anything where both your mistakes and successes build onto the character, and sort of creates their identity through decisions.
But there's a history.
I think maybe something we're taking for granted here is that, especially people that are unfamiliar with playing role playing games, a big part of the joy and just enjoyment of role-playing games is the building of that character, the building of the person. It's not about, the goal is to win, or the goal is to become king, or the goal is to whatever, but it's like the accomplishment is in creating and building a character for good or bad, just like in like your own life experience. It's like things happen, you react, you grow, you change, you don't. And getting to do that in an environment where anything can happen, where it doesn't have any real life implications, and you get to craft that story and craft that character. That is really the essence of that game.
And you can make mistakes, and those mistakes get built into that character's personality,
history.
Yeah, I mean,
the character has a history.
Yeah, the character has a. Stephen had a gnome illusionist once, and
a gnome illusionist.
Yep. And as this character started getting more and more powerful, the more powerful spells that were available to him were based in sort of like this sort of shadowy
kind of stuff.
Yeah. So then this gnome illusionist, who was kind of happy-go-lucky, starts to turn a little bit. And I had a dwarven.
We talked about it
writer,
too.
yeah.
Outside of the game, we're like, I'm definitely going to start turning this towards evil. I would really like to explore what it's like just to see that transition from, and how everybody else is going to react as things just start getting weirder. And it's just and you can know that outside of the game, and then when you get in the game, if you're good at role playing, it has no effect. You can actually role play better because you kind of know where this arc is going.
Yeah.
And so it just becomes just so good.
Yeah.
Well, and I think
So I was
Those
like,
moments are so good.
I had a dwarven fighter, and I was like, eventually I'm going to have to try to stop you, right? And he's like, well, and so we're ultimately every single session kind of building towards that, like in subtle ways, because we're playing a long game, you can do that, and it was nice to, again, like Stephen was saying, communicate outside the game about what you want, and then let these sort of characters move around.
And I mean, that's in like every great movie or show. It's like you have these characters you see with traits and with ways they do things and things they consistently do, problems they consistently have, and they're building. And like you can a lot of movies in particular, because it's a condensed format, is you can see how 2 or 3 things happening early in the movie are going to eventually result in like this thing.
Yes.
And in a role playing game, you just get to walk that out.
Yeah, and I think based on our discussion here, one of the tips that I would give someone who is running a game different than the diatribe I gave last time is to recognize when a player feels like they have made a mistake and bring that up later on in the actual session as something they now have to confront. Right, and let them either be brought down by it, hopefully not, or overcome it. Right, like you stole from that noble, to take the example from before, and it's like then something starts happening. You can start to see the consequences of your action, and then you can go and you can deal with it. That's one thing you can't do in Diablo 3. Right, you can immediately erase any mistake that you've made, and so you lose a lot of that character. So bringing those mistakes in and letting you redo it not by just respecing, but by confronting it and changing the world and dealing with the consequences of it, I think makes for a really powerful role-playing session.
Even as simple as like you chose fire and not ice as your tree, and then like now you need ice to accomplish this objective you want, and you don't have it.
Right.
Well, yeah, and see, now we're on the quest to go get the ice potion.
Right.
Like this stuff spins out. The narrator doesn't really have to do anything if the players are good enough. And being good is not in the sense of skill, but in the terms of just knowing how to craft a story together. Something that takes a lot of time. Like I said, we've been doing this for 25 years now.
Yeah, I guess so.
I'm on 25 years, which is a quarter of 100 years, which is a significant amount of time. And we've been playing with the same people. We've been crafting stories together our entire childhood. So you get better at it. And that is so fascinating to see. I often tell new people, role-playing is like, imagine the best moment of fictional reading that you've ever engaged in, whether it's Thrawn or anything else for you, Zach, like where you just can't put the book down and everything is just blowing your mind, and it's beautiful and emotional, and maybe it's you're tearing up or you're so happy. That level of emotion happening every week, and then you're in charge of the character that you're reading about, and then your friends are in charge of everything else that's happening. What that ultimately is like week after week after week, it's incredible. It's so much fun.
It's incredible.
And meantime, similar to the movie example, characters are always on the verge of death, even though they're not going to die.
Right.
Right? Like when you're watching Indiana Jones, do you really think that he's going to die in this, moment of trying to swing out?
If you did, there'd be a lot more tension.
Right? And that's the important part about how you switch a GMing understanding from confrontational to storytelling, is what you're trying to accomplish is the feeling in action movies where the protagonist isn't going to die, but you think it might happen anyway. That is the key. And when you switch from, I know that, and this has happened so many times, we started doing this early, I know that what you just rolled technically should kill you. I'm going to find a way to make your character live through it, and we'll see what goes on because of that. We start dealing in consequences instead of termination.
Yeah.
And as long as you can start to get that in your head, your games turn to storytelling kind of pretty naturally.
And sometimes characters die.
Sometimes they do. And the player needs to be ready for that to happen. I think it needs to be an enriching experience rather than a super just like, I'm angry now experience.
Yeah. And I will say I've cried when a character died. And you go probably through some quick little versions of Sage's Degree. There'll be some anger there probably, but to know that sort of
character you've witnessed for 20 weeks.
Or
exactly. 2 years evolving and changing and growing, and then knowing that like Jonathan's or Steven's magical gnome illusionist is gone.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to see him
There
again.
are differences in how you die in a role-playing game. There are good deaths and there are wrong deaths. Bad deaths are like one of my favorite characters that you had, where it's like playing a fairy character that gets put into a bag of holding just like off just a random whim of another character, and then like, oh, well, the rules say that you would suffocate because there's no oxygen in a bag of holding, and so it's like your character is dead.
Yeah.
It's like, that is so unfulfilling.
Well, and it didn't have any part in the story.
Yeah, it's just awful. Versus like my gnome illusionist, who has turned completely to darkness and now must be killed by Jonathan's character.
Well, someone's gonna die.
In some kind of this grand conflict. It's like, how beautiful is this? Even as I'm potentially approaching death, I love the arc. I love the story.
And even going back to the consequences stuff, once a character dies, I would say number one, don't bring it back unless there's like some sort of great quest they have to go on. We had I think your actual gnome illusionist ended up dying on sort of a weird thing, but you got resurrected, and at that point it was just like, well, I mean, what stakes are there anymore?
Yeah.
You know, I think you got to be very, very careful as a GM about making sure that the stakes of death stay there for the tension of the deal, because if not, it becomes an issue. But if a character does die, you can let the memory of that character survive through the consequences that then happen both to the characters and outside of the characters. I think there are ways to keep the memory of that character alive, which is something that the player of the character loves to hear about and experience. I think that's very good for them.
It's like my character had a role.
Yeah, and actually, both Burning Wheel and Torchbearer are very good, and Mouse Guard are very good about this. They actually have a section built into a campaign where you reminisce about characters who have passed. I think that's pretty cool.
You like raise a glass to fallen characters, so you always remember them. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Any final parting thoughts on role-playing games from the Woolies?
Well, there's a whole lot more,
about this for
obviously. Yeah, we could talk about it for 1,000 years.
Just keep on it rolling.
I would say, if I could boil it down to my advice for a GM, other than the every story is the same, watch that video, understand the hero's journey. Very important. As long as you're structuring things like that, you should be fine. But secondarily, I would say let the story, or let the mechanics serve the story, but at the same time be open as a GM to changing your plans. Because you can let...
Just say yes.
Yeah, just say yes, right?
Yeah.
It's like there's a GM we used to have where if there was someone who was important to the plot, you couldn't kill them as much as you tried. That's frustrating. Instead, let us kill them and then let there be consequences, and let that be the new story. And you have to be agile, right? And you can't, as a GM, I think, be connected to the characters you create. You have to have a different standard for yourself. But if you're able to do that, then you can have that living world feel, and you can really allow people to enjoy and engage in that story in a narrative sort of way.
Yeah.
Anything on your end?
I'll say this.
Say it.
I've probably spent more hours playing card games, board games, than role-playing. If I could choose one, I would get rid of everything except for role-playing games. Like, if I had to choose, that would be the genre.
That's what you'd save.
Yeah,
if they're all falling off a cliff.
So anybody who's considering, is this valuable enough to go through all the hoops to get a group going and start to figure this out, it is the most valuable gaming experiences ever. Not even close.
It's one, looking back, you put the highest value on those.
Oh my gosh, it's not even close.
Very cool. Well, let's get some questions. Also known as answers. Some answers from past questions we've asked. If you could incentivize any action in tabletop, what would you choose? Michael on YouTube says, the thing I'd like to see incentivized in tabletop gaming is sportsmanship/experience. At a few of the big tournaments I went to for old L5R, there was often an award or prize given to the player who was voted for being the most sportsmanlike. I think it could be structured better, but the idea of rewarding someone for giving their opponent a good experience should be explored.
Quick thing before we go into it. He actually wrote Old 5R, which I think is a great way of...
Yeah, we're starting to do O5R and N5R.
Oh.
Old 5R and new.
Okay, all right, I like that. All right. Please carry on.
Really, this Prize and Pot in tabletop was a wild podcast. There's a lot of, the reception was very like
that's last week's episode. Yeah,
there's a lot of people that were like, no, prizes and
tradition
and even like big prizes must be there to incentivize travel and these kinds of things. So there's good points all around.
It has indeed worked in the past.
It has indeed worked in the past, but the main thing is like, yeah, sportsmanship, that's cool. How do you incentivize that? What else can you incentivize aside from winning? And this is a good example. It's so hard to do it though. I will say this about big prizes and winning tournaments is like, there's no subjectivity involved in that. But the moment that we start saying who was the best sportsman, well, now we're voting or we're having a conversation, and now it's politics and all sorts of weird stuff.
All right, other answer was on episode 16, we asked what game meshes theme and mechanics well? Craig on YouTube says, I like the idea of rewarding archetypes other than just Spike. Maybe something like most thematic prize, most exciting moment of the game. on a game with X restriction. That's actually back to the prizes. That has nothing to do with theme mechanics. But the idea of rewarding things like thematic deck or exciting moments or a restriction on a deck. I think one thing I talked about with Destiny is like if you're the only person at the event using a particular character.
Yeah.
Like if you're the one person that brought this character,
Yeah.
whatever that is, I think that's a really cool thing to reward to kind of encourage deck diversity.
Yeah. Also in dice games, we did this in the old MonCon one year. Excuse me.
That's right.
Is that every time you rolled a whiff in a game, you would put a tally mark, and then whoever rolled the most whiffs at the end of the game got a thing. Maybe it takes the sting out a little bit, you know?
It's like another one. Rack up whiffs, right?
Right.
It's like
so the most blanks rolled in a tournament of Destiny,
Yeah.
those kinds of things would be cool.
Like at least now I feel like at least someone will understand. It's like look how many whiffs I rolled. You know? All right.
Yeah,
Most
and
characters
it takes
dead in Game of
takes the
Thrones.
subjectivity out, right? Because like you hear players all the time like I was rolling bad.
Yeah.
That's one thing. It's like I had 42 blanks that
Yeah,
game.
it's like, all right, that's really
that's
something.
actually you rolled bad. We can go with that. All right, on to some actual questions. You can use the hashtag AskCovenant. We'll answer your question on the show. First question is from Matthew Moody on YouTube. What are some ways to make a stagnating meta feel fresh again?
Maybe that's like a commercial. It's a good question. Ways to make segment. Well, you got to do something. I mean, so the first thing is you have to do something. New cards in the same format in the same way are very much not going to refresh. Even if you have a stagnating meta and you get an exciting card, you have so much to cut through before it even feels fresh again. It's like you already got all this stuff piled on you. An exciting card might like dig up a little bit, but it's not going to do it. So you need a shotgun blast of something, a new rotation policy, a new restricted list, a new cards that are legal.
I think there are different levels of this, right? Where it's like if you're just a player and you don't have any control over the events, the release schedule, any of that kind of stuff, how do you keep that fresh? And I think for me, it's don't commit to judgments or ideas and explore. Because in every game I've ever played, there's a whole bunch of this is the card that everyone's talking about. This is the best way to build this deck. This is the best way to do this. And there's so many cards that go untouched that don't go into decks.
The internet is actually awful for this.
We actually talked about that in the, I think it was the meta episode. Yeah. But in short, explore. Like at minimum, explore. Run things you wouldn't typically run. Play characters or decks or cards or miniatures or whatever that you wouldn't typically put in. And I think you'll be surprised at how not, it might be that the best decks are at a 60%. Even the worst stuff is usually at like 45 on like some scale. It's like it's not that far behind. And so like if you've played a lot and you're pretty good, you'll actually still win a lot of your games running those weird things.
Here's the thing that I think is really practical advice is get your group together. Let's say you have a Game of Thrones. We're talking about Game of Thrones. Get your group together. Give everybody one card that they can ban for the next tournament. Right? Can't ban the same card. Of course, it's worthless. And go around, and maybe you do it silently. You write it down. And then you have your community-driven banned list, which is going to be the most productive for that community. Because if everyone's tired of these cards, then they'll vote for those cards. And you also get this interesting level of interaction and political thing now where it's like, I'm going to take your Theon away if you take my Dany away. Don't you dare vote for that. And so that can be a fun little thing on its own. So that's ways of thinking about how to manicure an experience without getting it handed to you from the top down. Without saying, here's FFG's released a new list. And it was so funny to me on the last podcast on the prizes thing. I saw somebody who had a couple of days before posted something that was essentially, my community is drying up. Like I've lost 6 to 7 players, don't know how much longer can do this. And then a couple of days later is saying, top prizes at tournaments is the only way to incentivize players to show up. And it's like, you have a problem where your community is failing.
Yeah, it's not working.
And you're saying that doing the exact same thing that I've been doing for all of tabletop is what will make it grow again. It makes no sense. So rather than holding on to this old idea of how we should be running events, let's think about ways that you might. it doesn't hurt to try new things if you're losing people already.
Sure.
So if it's stagnating, throw some fresh ideas in there. Like we even just did a very small change, the mulligan tournament for Game of Thrones, where you could do a spoils type selected mulligan instead of a full sweep. It's a small change,
Well,
right?
yeah, I mean, so we're in a position where we're actually crafting events and organizing our community, and our players are really great people, and they do some of that on their own, which is like our Netrunner community is pretty great about not just running the meta stuff.
Yeah.
Even our Destiny community, I remember PoMoz blew up, and everyone's complaining about it, and like, we'd have 20 people show up, one person's running that deck, which is great because you want to play against it, you want to test against it,
You do.
but you don't want to only play against it because then it becomes annoying. And so, but like with our events, we're actively, it's Netrunner, we have like an identity crisis event coming up where there's some just old things. Or X-Wing this weekend is the Force Awakens event where you can only run blue logo products.
Yeah.
And it's just this wildly different thing. So there's a lot of ways to spice it up. Even if you're just a player, though, you and your fellow players can do something about it. And you as a player, I think for me, I'm always making sure, I like to explore anyway, and I don't like to like just listen to what cards are good or bad from other people. But that to me has kept things fresh for most games, even without any official anything. Always challenging myself to try to make characters that aren't good work, or try to make lists that aren't that great.
A really great way to challenge yourself if you're a player. And I think this applies to all the archetypes. I think some probably are more interested in doing it than others. But if you do very, very well or even win with a deck 1 week, take all of those cards, put them aside, and then try to make a deck with none of those cards, right? Like really like try to, because none of them really let you see the whole place. And if you want to win again, you're going to want to try hard. And you never know, you may just invent a whole new meta by doing that, which could be cool.
Why don't you just ban all those cards from the next tournament? Wouldn't that be fun?
The winner's deck just gets banned.
just gets banned. That's
That's
great.
Yeah, I mean,
like
you can imagine Destiny if it was like week to week, the deck that wins, those characters you can't play.
Yeah.
We had I had an old college professor, and the people he would give 3 A+, right? We had an essay every week. 3 A+. Those people that got the 3 A+ would not have to do an essay the next week. And then so that would let everybody else catch up, right?
Yeah.
So if you just had a week before, whatever cards are used in the winning deck, you can't use, and it rotates, that'd be very interesting.
Even
Great.
literally in Destiny, just the characters not getting used would be big enough.
Yeah. Or like runners or corps.
Or
you
in
can't
X-Wing, it's like
use.
these are the ships you can't
Yeah.
use. You can use the upgrades or whatever, but that's actually, I'm going to put that one on the,
right
on the
down
idea.
the bottom of
Next
it.
question.
Maybe Thrones plot decks. Wouldn't that be cool?
man.
The chills. Getting the heaves.
Getting the stompy feet. All right, next question from Sir Joker on Reddit. Back in the AMA, he asked this, and we're revisiting some of those questions. Is what is your primary motivation for owning a local retail site rather than just an online storefront?
I like that you said local site and online storefront. I would have flipped those entirely. Local storefront and online site, right?
Yeah,
Site
well,
on
they
made it happen.
Announce and what have yous.
Here's I'll kick this off. I guess as
There's a lot here.
As an idea, one of the reasons is what we literally just talked about, where we are able to approach a problem that is big in games, which is a stagnating meta. And because we have a store, we actually have some say in how those problems might get solved. So honestly, like the ultimate problems to be solved online, what do you serve online to a gaming community? You have content, which everybody's always looking for, educational entertainment. Content is always a big deal. And then you have means of purchasing. So doing a better store, doing the subscription service, great example, providing access in a much easier, much better way. So we have a lot of things we can do online, a lot of problems we can solve to make people more invested and interested in tabletop gaming. But then when you take those people and put them in a local setting, there's a lot more problems locally to me. Like, how do you consistently keep people interested in games on a local level? How do you actually form connections between people at a store? How do you most effectively promote to a local audience and a local community to pull them into the hobby? Like, it's just there's so many more problems with the base level foundational local unit than there is online that it's where it needs to happen.
Yeah, it's really the testing ground for every theory that we might have. I mean, if we just had an online site, it would just really be theory crafting at that point. By actually trying to implement it and seeing if it works, how the response is, that we can get some real feedback from that.
And it's also, I think, a lot of the need for the online, it comes from problems that are not being addressed at a local level. And so, we start a lot of these podcasts by talking about why in going to the top and getting down to it. And for us, we think tabletop is fantastic.
Yeah.
A fantastic medium for human connection ultimately. And so most of the things that we think can be better are at the local level.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if it's not, I mean, ultimately, if it's not about ultimately bringing people together, then what are we doing it for?
Plus, at the same time, like we play tabletop games, and we are a part of the local Tulsa community, and like our ability to offer our take on it and try to solve problems on a local level is really important to us. So that's why. Remember, you can use hashtag AskCovenant and get your questions answered here on the show. And now we have a question for you to answer in the comments, which is, what is the one game that you recommend most? Until next time.
For role-playing?
For any game.
For anything.
What game do you
Whoa.
recommend the most?
All right.
Until next time, keep playing.